The hotel on Paseo de la Reforma awoke each morning with the cold brilliance that only polished marble can hold. The vast lobby reflected the light of the city in sharp, dazzling fragments like frozen rivers that had been carved into the stone. Even before the morning rush of businessmen and tourists, the building seemed to hum with a quiet arrogance, as if it knew its walls had witnessed more secrets than most people would in their lifetime. Every polished surface, every gilded edge seemed to demand admiration, to remind everyone who stepped through its doors that this was a place where appearances mattered. And each morning, long before the streets outside filled with honking horns and impatient drivers, Lucia arrived. She moved silently through the staff entrance, her presence marked only by the soft creak of her shoes and the faint rustle of her uniform. She slipped into her clothes with the precision of ritual, fastening each button as if securing herself against the day ahead. Her hair was pulled back into a neat ponytail, tight enough to keep stray strands from her face, tight enough to remind her of discipline. Then came the gloves, always the gloves, pulled on with the same gravity one might give to a sacred task. For her, cleaning was not just labor. It was craft. It was order in a world that often resisted it. Her cleaning cart was both her burden and her companion, its shelves lined with bottles of blue and green liquids that shimmered like tiny lagoons captured in plastic. To anyone else, they were ordinary chemicals, but to Lucia, each had its own story, its own purpose. She could tell, just by glancing at a stain, which bottle would erase it and which would only smear it deeper. Years of repetition had built a private map in her mind, a secret knowledge of every blemish and every corner of the hotel's endless corridors. She moved through this marble kingdom with quiet authority, even if no one else ever acknowledged it. The reception staff rarely spared her more than a distracted nod, too consumed with their clipped phone calls and rehearsed smiles for wealthy guests. Their greetings were mechanical, spoken as if they were brushing dust from their shoulders. That indifference suited her. Anonymity was its own kind of freedom. It allowed her to glide unnoticed, to vanish into the walls, to listen to conversations not meant for her without anyone suspecting. Over the years, she had learned to survive in silence, to find dignity in invisibility. Her days unfolded in patterns so precise they might have been a dance. Corridors polished in sweeping off, doors checked with gentle pressure, elevators wiped down in swift, practiced movements. There was rhythm in the repetition, comfort in knowing what came next. The world above her smelled of expensive coffee, foreign perfumes, and cigars that burned too quickly. But her world was measured by the sharp scent of bleach, the warm hum of vacuum cleaners, the faint sting of lemon polish. It was a different music, one only she seemed to hear. But that Tuesday, something shifted. It began subtly, with the sudden appearance of men in dark suits who seemed to see without looking, their eyes sweeping the lobby as though memorizing every exit. Their presence alone was enough to bend the air. Then the whispers spread. The Esmeralda Hall, usually reserved for weddings or corporate banquets, had been sealed off for a private gathering. Orders arrived swiftly and without explanation. Every surface must gleam, every vase must be refilled with fresh flowers, and silence must reign as if the hotel itself were holding its breath. Lucia obeyed without complaint. She dipped her hands into cold water to revive tired roses, polished the mahogany tables until they reflected the light like still ponds. Yet, as she worked, she felt the tension in the air tightening around her, a rope being pulled taut, ready to snap at the slightest mistake. In the distance, two young waiters huddled near a half-open door, their whispers sharp against the hush of the hall. One tried to laugh, though the sound came out nervous and thin. "They say a real sheikh is coming," he murmured, "with bodyguards like in the movies." The other bent closer, his voice nearly swallowed by the carpeted walls. "And they say he doesn't trust anyone who can't speak his language." Lucia kept her head bowed, cloth circling across the table's edge. Her movements remained steady, but inside her chest something flickered. Curiosity, unease, she couldn't quite name it. She lifted her eyes for only a second, catching sight of the window. Beyond the glass, the sky had darkened to a heavy gray, swollen with rain that threatened to break. The world outside seemed to echo the storm building inside the hotel. Then her supervisor appeared, Mr. Valdez, clipboard in hand, his tie always just a little too tight, his expression caught between weariness and command. "Lucia," he said, scanning his list rather than her face, "finish here and move to the main corridor. Not a single footprint. Understood? And please, don't linger when they arrive." His words carried no cruelty, but neither did they carry warmth. She nodded, obedient as always, folding her cloth with the precision of habit before guiding her cart away. The main corridor stretched out before her, long and gleaming, its silence so complete that even her own footsteps felt like an intrusion. She paused at a grand mirror mounted on the wall, her reflection caught in its flawless glass. Almost without thinking, she raised her cloth and wiped away a tiny speck on the frame, a gesture more instinct than duty. For a heartbeat, she lingered, and her mind slipped elsewhere, away from the marble, away from the hotel. She thought of her son, Daniel. At that very moment, he would be arriving at his school in Iztacalco, his backpack too heavy, his jacket with the broken zipper barely holding together. She remembered the rushed breakfast, the warm glass of milk pushed across the table, the hurried goodbye at the door. She had promised him she would stop by the store after work, pick up the supplies he needed. "Today I will," she whispered inside herself. But even as the thought formed, she knew it was a fragile promise, one she might break without meaning to. And then the signal came. Radios crackled like distant thunder, footsteps moved in unison, and men with earpieces emerged from the shadows of the hallway. They moved with rehearsed precision like soldiers trained in silence. And behind them, the figure everyone had been waiting for. The Sheikh. He appeared with the gravity of someone accustomed to being observed. His skin was dark, his beard trimmed with exact care, his robe hidden beneath a tailored jacket that draped over his shoulders like a cloak of authority. Each step he took was slow, deliberate, but his presence filled the hall as though he carried a storm within him. The hotel manager rushed forward with a polished smile, every gesture rehearsed. "Welcome, sir. The hall is ready." But the Sheikh did not reply. His eyes swept across the room, not lingering on the chandeliers or the luxury, but on faces, measuring, weighing, judging. Lucia felt herself shrink, pressing closer to her cart, as if it could shield her. She kept her gaze low, hands frozen on the handle. And yet, against her will, curiosity betrayed her. She raised her eyes for just an instant as he passed. And then the unexpected happened. The Sheikh stopped. Not before the manager, not before the gilded doors of the Esmeralda Hall, but before her humble cart. His gaze fell on the bottles of blue and green, the neatly folded cloth, the tools of her invisible craft. For a long, unbearable silence, he simply stared. Lucia felt her heart hammer twice, hard and loud, as if it might echo against the marble. Then he spoke, a short phrase, his voice low, the words foreign to every ear in the corridor but hers. Valdez rushed forward, flustered. "Sir, this way, please." But the Sheikh remained still. He repeated the phrase, clearer this time, his eyes fixed not on the manager, but on the cloth trembling faintly in Lucia's hand. The manager stammered in English, offering apologies, promising to fetch a translator. One of the assistants fumbled with his phone, tapping desperately at a translation app. Around them, the bodyguards shifted, closing in subtly, their presence now a wall between worlds. And then, something strange stirred inside Lucia. The words he had spoken did not strike her as foreign. Instead, they opened something hidden deep within her, like the sudden taste of mint tea long forgotten, sharp and cool against her tongue. For a fleeting instant, she was no longer standing in a hotel corridor. She was elsewhere, seated at a wooden table, bathed in the scent of incense and dry wood, a child again, listening to a story in a language she had buried. The memory flashed so vividly, it felt like her body had made a mistake, like time itself had folded in on her. She did not want to speak, she did not want to be seen, but the words he had offered were a key, and the lock inside her had no choice but to turn. Her throat tightened. She swallowed, gripping her cloth so tightly her knuckles ached. And then, against every instinct that told her to remain invisible, she opened her mouth. Her voice emerged soft, almost fragile, but steady. She answered him. The words slipped into the silence, delicate and perfectly formed, just as the doors of the Esmeralda Hall burst open, and a pale-faced man rushed out, his urgency spilling into the manager's ear in hurried whispers. The manager's smile crumbled, but Lucia still carried the syllables on her tongue, warm and alive. She had not finished speaking, yet suddenly every gaze in the hall was fixed on her. For the first time in years, the manager looked directly into her eyes. The Sheikh, too, turned toward her fully, his expression unreadable but unshaken. The marble corridor seemed to grow heavier, filled with a silence that pressed against the chest. And then, with the same slow rhythm her grandmother once used when weaving ancient stories by candlelight, Lucia gave the words their full form. "Welcome. May your path here bring you peace." In Arabic. The sound traveled down the hall like a ripple across still water, impossible to ignore. The bodyguards exchanged glances, one even breaking into the faintest smile, surprised at what he had heard. The Sheikh himself did not smile, but in his eyes something flickered, a glimmer of recognition, as if he had just uncovered a relic he thought the world had buried. The manager stuttered in disbelief. You understood him?" His words stumbled in English, but the Sheikh did not answer him. Instead, he spoke again, this time directly to Lucia, his tone softer, his words reserved for her alone. They exchanged a brief dialogue, quiet and fluid, a conversation that passed over the heads of everyone else like smoke. To the staff, it was nothing more than a code, an enigma they could not decipher. But to Lucia, it was a bridge, fragile, improbable, but real. Valdez shifted uncomfortably, his frown deepening as though some hidden rule of the hotel had been broken, one he could not articulate. And then, as suddenly as it began, it was over. The Sheikh turned away, his entourage sweeping him toward the Esmeralda Hall. Lucia remained behind, her hands trembling, her breath unsteady, her heart still racing too quickly. The smell of freshly brewed coffee drifted faintly from the cafe, but over it lingered something older, stranger. A trace of incense, of wood smoke, of a world she thought she had lost. Something inside her had shifted, something she knew would not be erased, no matter how many mirrors she polished or how many corridors she crossed. And though she did not yet understand it, this moment was not an ending but a beginning. For the Sheikh, with a single nod to one of his men, had already given his first order. An order that would place her before him once more, much sooner and much more intimately than she could have ever imagined.